because in this picture we're investigating our own nature, and we come to find that there is some correspondence between our nature and the nature of all of reality. I think that can lead us to certain, I guess, metaphysical models of the nature of reality. And I think here, when it comes to experience, I think we've been very much in alignment. But I think you seem to adopt a kind of consciousness-only ontology.
Yes, I would. I would suggest that even from a conventional materialistic perspective, whatever we are as a person or a body is a byproduct of or emerges from the universe. Therefore, whatever we are essentially must be the same as what the universe is essentially. After all, the universe gave birth to us. So even from a materialistic perspective, the idea that what we essentially are and what the universe essentially is it's obvious. It's so, of course, there we're in agreement. Where we may diverge is as to what the nature of this shared reality is. I would suggest that having explored myself and discovered that consciousness is the essential, irreducible nature of myself, that's something I can verify in my own experience. Having agreed that whatever I essentially am must be the reality of whatever it is that gives birth to me as an apparent person, it's a small step from there to conclude that consciousness must therefore be the reality of the universe. So I would suggest that underlying the apparent multiplicity and diversity of objects and selves, there is a single, infinite and indivisible reality whose nature is spirit or consciousness. Yes.
Yeah, I completely agree that there's a single indivisible reality, and that, as you say, we can extrapolate from ourselves that we are made of the same stuff as everything else in the universe. And I think that the slight difference would be, I guess, I would say, for me, I feel like the experiences we've been talking about shows me, rather than saying I am consciousness, I might say I am the fact of being as is known as in consciousness. So it's illuminated here by consciousness. But
well, okay. But then you posit that being is something known by consciousness. The being and consciousness are two different things. That's a problem. Can you say from your experience, I am? I
would be tempted to just say am or is, because of my predilection for the Buddhist approach.
Indulge me my Vedantic background and allow me to. Okay, yes, am, yes, but I am or am. In other words, you can assert the presence of your being.
Yeah, the presence of being.
The presence of being, perfect, not your being. You can assert the presence of being. There is, we could say, there is being. Yes, that's what, when I say I am, that's what those words mean. I'm asserting that the fact of being. Yeah. Now, how is it possible for us to assert that there is being? We're not guessing it. We're not imagining it. We assert that there is being because we know it. It's our experience. There is being. Being is known. Yeah? Can we say being is known?
Mm-hmm.
The common way of, if you'll let me use the word I, everyone can say I am. The reason we can say I am is because I know that I am. Now, what is it that knows that I am or that there is being? Is the being that I am known by, or the being that is, or the being that I am, known by something other than itself? Or is it the being that I am that knows itself? In other words, when we say I know that I am, is the I that I am a different I from the I that knows that I am? Or when we say, I know that I am, is it not the same I that I am that knows that I am?
I completely agree that it is. It's the same thing of
But
being that
there
knows
you have
itself.
to conclude, well, perfect, perfect. And therefore your distinction between consciousness and being is not valid.
I think
You cannot say that being is appearing in consciousness, because it contradicts what you've just agreed
no,
with.
I think I would say that consciousness is not, you said, is it known by a separate thing? I would say consciousness is not a thing. It's a capacity or a property of being, not all being, not a black hole or a
Okay,
supernova, but of
let's take that
this
statement.
little ripple.
Consciousness is a property of being. Let's just explore that statement. Consciousness is a property of being. In other words, consciousness is something that being has. Okay, if that is true, experientially, if that is consistent with the evidence of experience, you have to be able to produce being in the absence of consciousness and say, look, here is being before it has acquired consciousness. And now here is being with consciousness. And therefore it's reasonable to say consciousness is the property of being. Now, can you do that?
We can't do that because we're confined by our only being able to know what's in our own consciousness, right? So I can't show you the Big Bang and say, look at this non-conscious being because of the privacy of consciousness. So I agree that I can't do that, but I don't think it's because non-conscious being doesn't exist. I think it's just the way we're set up. I can't show you the consciousness or the lack of consciousness. If this cup is a physical object that doesn't have consciousness, I can't show you its lack of consciousness in the same way I can't show you the presence of consciousness in my mind. So I feel we have to go beyond experience. It's not from experience that I conclude that I don't think, so the reason I guess I see consciousness as an emergent feature of reality isn't because my experience tells me so, but it's because as I interact with the world, I see the way that vision depends on eyes, which seem to be these physical things.
That's an interpretation. That's an interpretation that there are other interpretations. There are other possible interpretations that do not appeal to the belief in the existence of something outside consciousness from which consciousness itself is generated. Now, whatever this stuff outside consciousness is that is supposed to generate consciousness, it is by definition unknowable to us because everything that we could know appears in consciousness. So this theory it will never be more than theory. And not only that, it appeals to the existence of a substance, namely matter, that we believe exists outside consciousness. Nobody has ever seen it. Nobody's ever found it. Nobody will ever find it or could ever find it. Moreover, we believe that this unknowable substance called matter gives rise to the only thing that we ever know, which is consciousness. Now, if that's not upside down thinking, what is? If that's not convoluted, what is?
I agree. It's
theoretical. Why not? The only reason for, sorry to interrupt you, and the only reason to imagine the existence of something outside consciousness would be if we couldn't explain our experience, reality, the world, using only the raw data of our experience, namely consciousness. But we can. So just using Occam's razor, should we not stick to the facts of our experience, namely consciousness, and only appeal to the existence of a substance called matter if we can't explain reality in terms of consciousness only? And it turns out we can very elegantly.
I think that's a reasonable approach, and maybe this comes down to personal how convinced one is, because I guess I've not been convinced that we can explain everything in a consciousness only picture. And as I mentioned, just the simple thing of something like the seeming dependence of visual experience on having eyes, and the way eyes seem to be made of smaller kind of, systems that we have no reason to believe are conscious, or just trying to think of, I would say I am a system that is conscious, whereas a cup is not conscious. In the way you think about this, can you talk about things being conscious, or I guess if there's only consciousness?
James, would you? Can we agree that our mind, an individual mind, is like a mini field of consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
and that within a mind, a thought arises, and the thought is made out of the mind in which it appears.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree? I mean, the thought is not put into the mind from the outside. It's made of mind stuff, whatever that is.
Yeah.
Can we? Is that a reasonable thing? Now, the thought itself is not conscious. For instance, a thought is not listening to our conversation. The thought appears in your conscious mind. It is made of your conscious mind, but it is not itself conscious. That goes for every thought, every feeling, every sensation, and every perception you have ever had. It is within everybody's experience that all their experience, let's take thoughts, that their thoughts appear in their mind, made of their mind, but a thought itself is not conscious. So here we have evidence that something can appear in consciousness, made of consciousness, but not itself be conscious. Now, how do you know that exactly the same is not true of the cup? That it is also an appearance in consciousness, made of consciousness. It only appears to be a physical object because you are viewing it from a localized perspective. It is that perspective that confers objectivity on the apparent object. But this cup, which you're quite rightly saying is not conscious, can still be made of consciousness, just like the thought that arises in your mind is not conscious, but it is made of consciousness.
I think you're right. In a situation like a dream, as you say, the things that arise are not conscious. The appearances are just appearances in consciousness. And so I think this just brings us back to our different ontologies, because I'm not saying consciousness is conscious. I'm saying physical systems can be conscious, rather than in a consciousness only picture. Yeah, you wouldn't say that an appearance.
But James, it's not your experience that your body, the physical systems are conscious. Your experience is that consciousness is conscious, that awareness is aware. So where do you get the idea that physical systems are conscious from?
From as you say, not from experience at all, but from the kind of philosophical and scientific investigation of the world, trying to fit everything together in a way that makes sense. So, as I said, something like the physical dependency of specific sensory experiences on the brain and sense organs, to me, suggests a direction of causality where the contents of consciousness, at least, are dependent on what we call these physical things like sense organs. And I think my honest feeling is it hangs together more elegantly if I posit that there is that reality isn't made of consciousness, it's made of something. The word matter is something I'm not that keen on, because it's something, as you say, deeply mysterious, something we can never know directly. But if you entertain the idea, you say, well, could we be in a situation where there was this unconscious process happening, and then at some point it formed certain patterns that became conscious? To me, I say, well, yeah, that to me seems plausible. I can't show you it directly, but that seems to be what's happened. I don't think of the Big Bang as having the same kind of conscious experiences that I have. It just seems so I agree that I can't prove it, but in the same way, I'm not a solipsist. I can't prove that you don't have experience. If we just confine ourselves to what we know directly through our own experience, we end up with limited.
No, it's very important not to misrepresent what I'm not suggesting that I'm not a solipsist, This is important because what this consciousness-only ontology that I'm suggesting is often put down by people who relate it to solipsism, and solipsism is obviously an absurd point of view from either of our ontologies. But it's important to clarify that what I'm not suggesting that all there is to the world, the universe, is an appearance in my own individual mind. That would be solipsism.
Right. Yeah.
Only my individual mind exists. Nobody else exists in the world. Nothing. It's just the contents of my mind. That is a position of madness. I think you and I would both agree on that. What I'm suggesting is that everything is appearance in a universal consciousness, and that each of our individual minds are localizations of that universal consciousness, made only of that in that universal consciousness, made only of that universal consciousness, from whose limited perspective its own activity appears as the universe, just as does the dreamed world. And the dreamed world only appears to the dreamed character that we seem to be in the dream through their eyes. Physical eyes are necessary. The dreamed character, the one that perceives the dreamed world, needs their eyes to see, need their ears to hear. But when we wake up, we realize that it wasn't their physical eye, physical ears that were hearing. What appeared as physical eyes were just how this localization of consciousness appears from another point of view.
And so in this picture, what we're experiencing right now is very similar to a dream. Is that right? It's in the same way that in a dream, everything that appears is made of consciousness. That's what's happening.
It's similar to a dream, except that when we have a dream, when we have a dream at night, our mind localizes itself as a single point of view within its own dream, the dreamed character that we seem to become. I would suggest that universal consciousness is, in a sense, dreaming or imagining the universe. In other words, the universe is its activity, but it has the capacity to localize itself as numerous points of view within its own dream. And every sentient being is one such localized perspective within universal consciousness, made of universal consciousness, from whose perspective or through whose agency it perceives its own activity as a universe.